Chodesh Tov, welcome. I'm Michal Fox-Smart, and I'm the Chief Program Officer here at the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. And I welcome you to a special evening, Rabbi Josh Feigelson, in conversation with Abigail Pogrebin about his new book, Eternal Questions, Reflections, Conversations, and Jewish Mindfulness Practices for the weekly Torah portion. As many of you know, IJS develops and teaches Jewish spiritual practices so participants can experience greater awareness, purpose, and interconnection, fostering a world of greater compassion, justice, and peace. We have a host of new programs coming up to support your learning, spiritual practice, and growth in community. And I'd like to take this opportunity, please, to call your attention to a few of them. Do you ever wish you were better able to listen deeply to others, especially those you care about? If so, we invite you to join us for Shema, the practice of sacred listening, a brand new program designed to help you be fully present in conversation, especially when emotions, differing values, or judgments may arise. It's a 5-week course that can make a lifelong difference, and it's beginning November 13th. Registration is also now open for Yesod, Foundations for Deepening Jewish Mindfulness Meditation. This is going to be the first of its kind 10-month systematic exploration and training in Jewish mindfulness meditation with an international team of leading teachers. It will begin in January of 2023. The next event in this very series of public conversations will feature Yossi Klein Halevi on November 30th from 8 to 9 p.m. And finally, I want to remind you that we meet here on Zoom every Monday through Friday at 12:30 Eastern for our daily mindfulness meditation sit, free of charge. Come anytime. The full program that we have coming up is available on our website. Please check it out. We would love to see you again. Today, our work at IJS is actually more important than ever. And we count on support from people like you, which enables us to offer programs like tonight's event and continue to expand our audience and increase our impact. If you're moved to do so, please go to our website's donation page, jewishspirituality.org. Now, while he is normally the interviewer for these events, tonight the tables are turned, and our author is the Institute's very own CEO and president, Rabbi Josh Feigelson. Josh joined IJS in February 2020 after serving as Dean of Students at the University of Chicago Divinity School. He previously served for 6 years as the Hillel Rabbi at Northwestern University, where he helped found and direct a program called Ask Big Questions, an initiative of Hillel International. Today marks the official launch of Josh's book, Eternal Questions, Reflections, Conversations, and Jewish Mindfulness Practices for the weekly Torah portion, published by Ben Yehuda Press and the #1 new release in the Torah category on Amazon. In true IJS fashion, Eternal Questions doesn't just include brilliant essays about the weekly Torah portion, but helps the reader to bring Torah into their life through reflection and practice. It is not a commentary to read and say, oh, that was interesting, but one with which to engage and to be transformed. If you haven't yet purchased a copy, I encourage you to do so at the website we're sharing in the chat. You can also order it directly from Amazon or Ben Yehuda Press. On a personal note, I will add that in my own education and career, I have been blessed to know many talented colleagues and friends. But I have rarely encountered anyone with the sheer capacity that Josh has. The fact that he produced this gorgeous Torah commentary while leading our organization through a period of rapid growth and transformation, not to mention a global pandemic, is simply astounding. So it is with great admiration and not a small dose of home team pride that I introduce Josh and this program tonight. Interviewing Josh will be writer and journalist Abigail Pogrebin. Abby is the author of 3 books, including My Jewish Year, 18 Holidays, One Wandering Jew, which was a finalist for the 2018 National Jewish Book Award. She was an Emmy-nominated producer for Mike Wallace at 60 Minutes, and before that produced for Bill Moyers at PBS. Abby also served as president of Central Synagogue from 2015 to 18, and we are blessed to benefit from her experience and insight as a member of IJS's Advisory Council. Abby, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Michal. It's great to be here.
I encourage
and
all
of you. Yeah.
I encourage all of you here in the audience to ask questions during this evening's event. To do so, please click on the chat icon at the bottom of your screen and address your questions to Q&A in the chat. And now I will turn it over to Abby and Josh.
You see how I need more IJS in my life because I was impatient. I was impatient to begin. So I interrupted. Forgive me, Michal. It's great to be with you all. Hello, Joshua.
Welcome to my studio, to my show.
You're very it's very dazzling. It's quite state of the art. First of all, Mazel Tov on your launch day. As a writer myself, I know that so much goes into these things, and there's a lot of shpilkis about the day of release, and you should just take a moment, particularly before I start to grill you with tough questions, to just take in that you achieved this, and it's a beautiful book, and I think it's one that's going to actually, I think, deepen so many of our practices and our own explorations when we think about Torah. But let's start with sort of the audacity of writing another book about the Torah, because even when you and I were talking before, there is something daunting about taking on this incredible text again, and there are obviously many books that take on every portion. So what in your mind, or what's your sort of like on one foot, how is this book a different one?
Well, first of all, Abby, thank you for agreeing for being here and to be the host and the interviewer tonight. It means a lot to me and to all of us. And Abby's a member of our advisory council, and so I want to say thank you for that too. So what makes this book different? Well, if you've read the introduction of the book, the introduction is actually titled "What Makes This Book Different from what makes this Torah book different than all other Torah portion books." And I think there's a few things. One is that it is intentionally designed, as Michal said, really not to leave you just saying, wow, that was interesting, but really to invite you into practice with how is this actually true in the rest of my body? Like in so much of the Jewish community, so much of our work, sort of stops at the head. Is what I find, right? It can be very intellectual, and we don't necessarily always engage with what's going on here and farther, the whole body and the whole experience in our relationships with people, in our relationships with the planet, and so as Michal said, this is really in the spirit of IJS's approach to Torah study in general, and so each of these essays, there's an essay for every Torah portion, and each one of them then has, as part of it, not just, I'll talk about the content of those essays in a second, but also what's most important to me is that each of them then goes a step further and says, how is this true in your own experience, and helps you get some questions, some clear questions about how you can engage that, as well as then each one has a various kind of mindfulness practice or Jewish meditation practice or other spiritual practice to help you build on that. So I would say, when I'm looking at my bookshelf, my wife Natalie is a writer. The game is on now. Natalie's a novelist. She sold many more books than I ever will. But she likes to organize her books by authors she thinks would enjoy each other's company, put them on the bookshelf next to each other. And so if I were going to put my book on, on the shelf, I picture, Jonathan Sacks, certainly, someone like Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, and his erudition and his breadth of reading, and the range of sources that he would bring in, contemporary and classical, etc. And other people like, my own teacher, Sheila Weinberg, right, or Nancy Flam, my predecessor at IJS, or even reaching further into someone like Sylvia Borstein, or someone like Thich Nhat Hanh, right? People who really take it into a sort of practice domain of how is this true in your own life. And so, if you can imagine that kind of mashup, that's where I see this book sort of distinguishing itself.
And the fact that the word conversations is in the title, I just want to repeat it. The title is Eternal Questions, Reflections, Conversations, and Jewish Mindfulness Practices for the Weekly Torah Portion. I just want to zero in a little bit on conversations. You are saying that every essay is centered around an original translation, am I right, of a commentary by a master of Hasidic tradition.
Right.
And then you put these Hasidic masters in dialogue with a range of other writers. And that includes poets, musicians, thinkers. How did you pick those partners?
Great. So yeah, thank you. I definitely want to speak to that. So some people on this call may be familiar with IGS's text study program that we have run for, coming up on almost 2 decades, I think. And it's one that, you can subscribe to, and people do every year. And by the way, it's a new year of Torah study. You can subscribe to IGS's text study program this year, and you can go on our website and learn about that. But 2 years ago, when I had just come on the job here at IGS in the summer of 2020, we were looking ahead to who was going to write our text study series for this coming year. And we didn't have anyone to write our sort of general track, and I was working with Rabbi Jonathan Slater, who is really the father, the parent of this program in general. Jonathan, who just recently retired from our faculty, and who did so much to bring this form of Torah study into our orbit, and was the editor and often the writer of these series. And so I was talking with Jonathan, we said, we don't have anybody lined up to write for the coming year. And we thought about a few different possibilities. And then I threw out, well, what if I wrote it? And I think he looked at me a little funny. He's like, do you know how much work that is? and I said, well, the truth is, for me, it would be not only a great way of getting to know our Torah and our audience and really have a relationship with people, but also that for me, this is my own form of spiritual practice that I've been engaged in for 25 years or more, since I was a yeshiva student in Jerusalem. And I found my first year in yeshiva, I was overwhelmed by how much I was learning. It was drinking from a fire hose, and I got to the end of the week, and we didn't have school, as it were, on Fridays. And I was like, I need to write something. I just felt this urge to write, to kind of synthesize what I was doing. And so I started writing weekly Divrei Torah and sending them out to sort of family and friends. And over the years, I went through various cycles of that. Every few years, I would write a new cycle. And it had been a little while since I had done one of those. And so I thought, you know what, it's time. I was feeling like it's time to write again and to go through again. And so, but with IJS's approach, we definitely anchor, traditionally had grounded a lot of our approach in the Hasidic tradition. Often it's been with one Hasidic text and working through it. In this case, I felt like I wanted to have more of a sampler. I didn't want to just stick with one. I wanted to look around and get a variety of voices. And then because of also who I am, by nature, I'm somebody who draws connections between things. That's kind of my part of my persona. A previous employer of mine said, you're an impresario. That's what you like to do. You like to put together, things. And so that's very much true in how I read and how I write and how I think. I'm a pretty voracious reader.
And what do you say? What do you mean by things?
Well, so, right, you mentioned this wide sort of variety. You can look in the bibliography. I should go grab a copy, but a variety of poets and writers, Jewish, not Jewish, from a wide range of traditions, and as well as my own lived experience and starting my own stories. And the other thing that I really also want to emphasize is that when I was writing this, was the fall of 2020. And there were a couple of big things going on in this country 2 years ago at that time. One was obviously the election, and the other, which really has an influence on this book, was we were all coming through the summer of sort of racial justice and racial awakening that was coming out of the murder of George Floyd and the protests that followed. And so I felt a real call during that time to really expand the voices I was bringing in to my study and who I was then bringing to our readers. And so when you look through this, you'll find these, as a result of that, I think some pretty incredible encounters between, an African-American poet like Claudia Rankine and Menachem Nahum of Chernobyl in the Me'orei Naim, right? And how do we put those together? Or Louise Erdrich, right? And a Hasidic master. So that's one of the things I'm actually proudest of with this book.
And you mentioned that like interesting isn't good enough. I just want to quote you. You said, it isn't enough for me that things are interesting. Life is too short and our times are too profoundly challenging for interesting to cut it anymore. Ideas need to come with ways we can enact them. So how are you kind of actualizing these ideas and making them sort of come off the page into our lives?
So in each, with each essay, right, the invitation is there's, first of all, a set of questions that really are designed for either you to do on your own. You can do it, as you're reading, but really to be honest with yourself, or to do in chavruta, do with a partner. Or if you want, by the way, if you want to do this with your synagogue as a adult education bulk discount, you can go to the publisher's website on orders of 10 or more. But having actual conversation, that's where the word conversation comes in the title, is to really have a genuine encounter with, in your own experience, how is this true, right? In your own life, when have there been times when you may have experienced X, Y, or Z? And if you did, what happened? If you didn't, how, why might that not have happened? So to have those kinds of conversations, as well as then to build mindfulness practices, which might be a meditation practice, which might be the kind of tikkun midot practice that my colleague Mark Margolius has really pioneered at IJS, or any number of embodied practices. I really have drawn heavily from my colleagues at IJS. Many other members of the faculty I've borrowed, with their permission, borrowed their some of their practices and put them into these books, so that each week you have something that you could take into life with you. Just because, as you said, I've read a lot of really interesting books, and it's time. The times we live in, it's not enough to be interesting anymore. We have to be able to do something with it.
I love that there's a question for each parsha, and I just want to read some of them so people have a flavor for it if they haven't read it. Vayishlach, how do we forgive ourselves? Shmot, how do we cry out? Seventh day of Passover, how do you embody your faith? Pinchas, when are we unified? Devarim, what do we say? The Shalach, how are we silent? I want to zero in on Yitro for a minute. How are we connected? You quote Adrienne Rich, a poem called "In Those Years," and it's just a brief excerpt here. In those years, people will say we lost track of the meaning of we, of you. We found ourselves reduced to I. Can you just give us a little bit more flavor, just a snapshot of a chapter like that?
Yeah, in fact, I'll pick it up. Hold on here.
You can get your prop.
I have it in front of me.
That's a coincidence. That's convenient. Well, we're all going to have it in front of us soon.
You're all going to have it in front of you. So the question of how are we connected, right? Ultimately, first of all, I should say something about the process, like by which these essays came into being. So generally how this would work is that Shabbat, I would get my library. I have a reasonably extensive Hasidic text library, and thankfully I have the skills to be able to read that in the original. And I would look through different sources to see what spoke is there something that grabbed me? And I started keeping track also to make sure I wasn't, I was giving everybody somewhat equal airtime. And this one actually for Yitro that you mentioned was centered on a teaching of the Ishbitzer Rebbe, Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner, who from the 19th century, and from his work, the Mea Shiloach. And he talks about here the opening word of the Ten Commandments, which is in Yitro, Anochi Adonai Elohecha. And he asks the question, why does the Torah write Anochi, which means I, but it has the cha sound, the kaf. And it could have said Ani Adonai Elohecha, which the Torah says in plenty of other places. Ani, which is the same word, same letters, Aleph Nun Yud, but here it says Anochi with a kaf. So why does it say that? And he goes into a whole thing about how this gestures at the kaf in Hebrew means something that is like something else. And so at this moment of revelation, not everything could be revealed. Some things were left behind, and it's a whole beautiful reflection on idolatry and everything else. And I think also in this essay here, I see it, that I also mentioned Emergent Strategy of Adrienne Marie Brown, who's another wonderful contemporary African-American author. And I try to explore by means of this teaching of Torah and these additional pieces, the big question, how are we connected? What does it mean for us to be connected? How are we connected with ourselves? How are we connected with the divine? And the questions that come after it, right, that sets up, first I'm looking at the first one. Has someone in your life played the role of Jethro for you, Moses' father-in-law? Have you encountered a time when you were feeling alone or overburdened from taking on too much, and a friend or family member or colleague helped you find another path? What happened? How did it feel? What did you learn about yourself? So this is an invitation to bring your own experience, right, into dialogue with the text and with what we've just learned. And then there's a suggestion, there's a couple of other questions, and there's a suggestion for an idea for meditation practice about bringing to mind a relationship of yours that has endured, right? And how you might bring that into your consciousness as you're practicing in your meditation this week. So you don't have to be a meditator, I should say, to do this, to engage with this book. Not all the practices are meditation, certainly, and you should try out whatever there is here and see what works for you.
And one of the things that I think you point out is just that so many of us were missing this in our Jewish upbringing. You write, mindful, heartful, intentional Jewish practice is sadly not something a lot of Jews have grown up with. Obviously, you have a job now that assumes a lot of people want it and need it, are seeking it. But can you just speak a little bit to sort of what we were missing, those of us who didn't have it, and how it has really enriched or is changing the landscape for Jewish engagement, connection, spirituality now? Yeah.
I think that a lot of people have grown up with a Judaism that is a few different things. One can be highly intellectual, right, and cerebral. It's about history. It's about study. It's about going to college, right? For multiple generations now, American Jews, that's really been the defining feature of non-Orthodox American Jews is, the centrality of higher education and the norms of academia. And but
I hope you're also going to mention the centrality of guilt.
Well, right. So and then on the other hand, there's been, not on the other hand, related, there's also been all of that. There's Holocaust guilt and trauma. There is survival and continuity and pressure about the ever dying people. And we've lived through a huge amount in the last 150 years, right? So we carry all of that with us. And unfortunately, what I think we've lost, what a lot of us lost or didn't get, at what was a joyful, heartfelt, emotionally open and available kind of Judaism, where and we wound up looking for that in other places, or a mindful kind of Judaism, where our Judaism wasn't for a lot of people, their Judaism was not something they experienced as contributing to their flourishing as human beings. I'll put it that way, right? And so, IJS was created really in the late 1990s, largely in response to this phenomenon over the 30 prior years of so many people leaving Jewish homes, Jewish upbringings, looking for that in Eastern traditions, in various forms of Buddhism or Hinduism, etc. And really the sense among our founders of what a shame, like that's so sad, because we have that, we have riches, we have so many beautiful things in our own backyard, in our own tradition, and can we just help? We just need to mine them and frame them and help people connect with them.
Yeah, I want to just actually ask you, and I want to first of all remind everyone, I know there's a lot of smart people, many of whom I know on this. Please begin to send your questions in the chat. They're going to come to me magically through the ether, and we welcome them because I'm going to go to them soon. I kind of want to just zoom out 10,000 feet, Josh, for a second, and have you define mindfulness. Sometimes I think we just assume we're all using that vocabulary in the same way. How do you define it, or what's the IJS kind of lens on mindfulness?
So the idea of mindfulness is that we're able to be aware of our own experience and be present in it from moment to moment, right? Fundamentally, that's what it comes down to, with the awareness that our minds are generally designed to deflect and go off. We want to be present here, and then the ways our mind works, it generally spins off, right? And so the practices of mindfulness are to bring us back to align with what our intention is in the moment, right? So it's really sort of as straightforward as that. It has started to be a bit of an overused term, possibly. We're definitely running into that, but that's at root. That's what we mean. And I would say in our own tradition, that just means living with kavanah, right? Kavanah is intention. And certainly the mystics talked about all sorts of kavanot that you would have, for blowing the shofar, shaking the lulav, or all the things we just did last month. But when you think about it, just most basically, what is your intention in this moment? Are you living in alignment with that intention? And are you aware of the alignment or misalignment? That's it. Right? No more, no less. If you can make that, if you can land that, you stuck the landing. Now, most of us don't. Most of us don't, right? It's not so simple. And so, that we spend our whole lives trying to do that. Us
also the idea that we know that there's so much about Judaism that we both embrace or sometimes dodge, in my case, of just how much there is to do, right? If you're going to kind of do Judaism, there's a big checklist for that. But then that idea at Sinai, we will do and we will hear. I just wonder, sometimes I've been taught, light the candles and then see what happens to you. But light the candles. You don't have to necessarily have the intention that you want when you're doing that lighting. Something is going to come of it. How do you sort of weigh you got to do these things, whether or not you're feeling anything?
That's a great question.
Let's get to the feeling. Let's get to what you're describing here about the being in the moment you're in.
It's a really, really great question, Abby. So I would say a couple of things. One is I'm blessed to be the parent of three amazing boys who range in age from 19 to 9. And so I've been through this journey, and I'm still on this journey of watching and being part of how do I help them to enter into this tradition, right? How do I help them to make it their own? And certainly when they were young children, I didn't care whether they understood the words of Kiddush on Friday night, right? What I really wanted them to do was just recite Kiddush on Friday night. I wanted them to be able to move their mouth in the right way. I wanted them to be able to show up and do the things, right? To shake the lulav or, whatever it was. And there's a developmental question about as we grow, how we grow into the possibility and the need for aligning that sense of intention and meaning, and how we start to direct ourselves. You might even say, it's fascinating to think about the notion of bar mitzvah, that age, So bar mitzvah literally means obviously somebody who is subject to the mitzvot, right? But I would say two things. Number one, Maimonides just defines that as a bar da'at, somebody who is capable of intelligence, but we might say in IJS language, da'at is awareness. Someone who's capable of awareness or self-awareness. And mitzvah is not just as the practice or the command, but the mitzvah, following the Aramaic, is tzavta, is connection, right? So it's capable of this sort of deeper sort of kind of connection. And certainly we found in our work, older adults, there's a stage of life you enter where you're really, really looking for this and you're ready to have a very mature relationship. But we think there's a lot of work to do along the way, right, leading towards that at various stages, how people deepen and grow and can deepen and grow into a relationship of meaning and alignment and presence in the moment and purpose that can come through the practices that we have from the Jewish tradition. So, yeah.
So I want to actually build on that, which Leslie has a great question, Leslie Simpson. What is the Jewish component of the mindfulness? And she's saying, I'm asking what is Jewish about the mindfulness enterprise? So you've kind of touched on it, but I think she's sort of asking
sure,
to kind of focus a little more through the Jewish lens.
So I think that comes through a lot in the teachings, in this book and in so many of the other things that we do at IJS, especially if you look in the Hasidic tradition. I mean, if you want something, you want stuff in Hebrew that looks like classical text, right? You get out, here I have next to me, this is what I'm studying with my chavruta right now, Rabbi Claudia Kreiman. We're studying B'nai Machshava Tova, which is a book by the Piazetzner Rebbe. And in it, and this is just an example, but there's so many texts like this where they're describing how to live in alignment with our intentions, how to be present in the performance of our mitzvot, right? How to use the experience of prayer, not just to rote recite some words at a prescribed time, but to actually be present in the experience of praying with a community, right, and opening up to the divine presence that is available for us to notice and be part of if we can attune ourselves to that. So what's Jewish about this is certainly the language of it, right? We at the end of the day, if you're meditating, if you're living with intention, whatever your practice is, living with intention is living with intention is living with intention. Like, that's human, right? That's a human issue. But our language, our practices, our mitzvot, right? The ways, the technologies, as it were, that we have for that, we have an entire culture and civilization, to borrow Mordechai Kaplan's term, we have an entire civilization that sets us up to do that. But we've become so focused, I think, on perpetuating that civilization and the concern, the dread that we have that it might not survive, that sometimes we lose sight of what an incredible, gift this is for being able to live mindfully, right? So I think that Judaism is an incredible system for living mindfully if one embraces it that way.
Michael J. Fox, whom you know, is asking, when did Jewish practice become rote with rules, limits, and separation instead of kavanah with depth and feeling and sharing? How will this book change that? You're going to fix that. You're going to fix that, Josh. That's what this book's going to do. Sure,
absolutely. Well, look, that's very much what the purpose of the Institute is. And if this book can help to do that as one small contribution, absolutely. When did it become this way? I think that tension has always been there. I think that, in our, Rabbi Joshua Heschel wrote about a phenomenon that already appears in the Mishnah, right, earlier on, about the tension between keva and kavanah, of the fixed forms and living with this sense of intention and purpose. And so I think it's always been there. I think that anytime you have a fixed calendar with fixed performances that were, meant to do and invited to do, but to experience that as invitation, that challenge is always going to be there, right? So I think it has in every period, b'chol dor vador, in every generation, this is probably a challenge. And what can we do about it? Well, I think that the more we can study and live our Torah with this kind of approach, with one that says, I want to find the meaning in it. And na'aseh v'nishma that you quoted, Abby, we will do and we will listen or we will understand, is not, it doesn't mean you have to do it even if you don't understand. It doesn't have to mean that. It can mean that. And there's its own meaning. There is beauty in that practice too, right? I don't want to denigrate that. But if you put them together, na'aseh v'nishma, we do them both, right? We want to do them both. I want to do it and I want to be present in it. I want to be listening. I want to be listening for what's going on in that moment and in myself at that time, right? So I think this isn't something, this is not a project that's so radically new. I actually think it's pretty radically old.
Linda Nussbaum is asking, what is the role, or is there a role for God in your meditation practice?
For me personally, I'll speak to me personally because I can't,
Okay.
I'm not going to speak for anybody else. And Linda's actually on my screen, so I see you nodding. Okay, good. Just state the question again. What is there a place for God? Is there a role for God?
It's what is the role, or is there a role for God in your meditation practice?
Yes. I could stop there. Yes, there is. For me, so I think a starting point for me that has been really so important for an important touchstone for our work at IJS, that's certainly, Jonathan, who I mentioned before, is my teacher in this, but for many of us, is one of the things that I don't want to say need to unlearn, but need to maybe feel invited to learn differently or think differently about, is what we mean when we say God, or the divine, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One, or any of the other, many, many names that we have. And many of us are schooled either implicitly or explicitly in a dualistic theology. There's God who's up here, and there's us who are here, and those are totally separate domains. And what so much of Hasidic theology is grounded in, and it has deeper roots, certainly in the Jewish tradition, is in a non-dualistic theology that says, the divine actually animates the entire universe, right? The divine is here right now within each of us, between each of us, and we are making God manifest in the world. And so for me in my practice, it is much more about quieting down to be able to enter into that, to experience it, to sense that presence, which is not necessarily always comforting and loving, though often it is. But it should also, if I'm being honest, there's also times that I'm called to, that I find challenge and I find myself called to account. But it's about tapping into that thing that I think is within me and between me and others and within, the whole world. That's what my practice is about, and that I understand to be divinity.
Mary Ann is asking, does IJS have any initiatives with Jewish education in the major American movements to help educators connect to this kavanah focus of Jewish learning?
I'm smiling at Michal because we were just having this conversation this afternoon.
So Mary Ann is ahead of the curve.
Mary Ann, and by the way, Mary Ann, we were just talking about what we can do for various amounts of money. So if you have, the requisite, if you're interested in the requisite investment, we can totally talk. Always raise some money. So yes, and not enough. right? We've done some pilot projects in day schools and supplementary schools, and a project called Educating for Jewish Spiritual Life. We are increasingly doing work with educators in a wide range of organizations that are serving teens and young adults. That's become a big focus of ours in the last couple of years, especially with our current strategic plan. And we actually have a study that's going to be coming out early next year in 2023 that we've done in partnership with several other organizations. That'll be the first of its kind, really studying the spiritual and religious lives of American 13 to 25-year-olds. And I think it's going to ask a very different set of questions about their lives than we have necessarily gotten a glimpse into before. And 1,200 teens and young adults responded to this survey, and we did focus groups, and it'll be really exciting. So, so yeah, as I mentioned before, traditionally, and I'm looking around at this room, the audience that's here has been traditionally our audience, and that is developmental, and there's all sorts of reasons why that would be true. And there's so much important work to do with younger people and with the educators who serve them, and so that is very much our focus, one of our foci going forward.
So we're getting into the home stretch already in the last few questions. So I'm going to ask you to be a little more condensed in these last ones so we can include a few more. Irene Ostroff wants to know about folks who can't read the Hebrew. She's not the only one asking. Is there a barrier there when you don't have that mastery?
No, because everything is translated, and the translations are meant to be very accessible. So you'll see Hebrew. The only thing that's Hebrew on the page is the Hasidic text for those readers who want that and who want that access. It's important to me. I think Hebrew is very, very important. And it also shouldn't be a barrier, right? So for those who want it there and who can make use of it, it's there. And for those who want the English or who want both, that is there as well. So yes.
Great.
You're welcome.
And there's right. You're right. You modeled efficiency there. I'm not rushing you with it. That you gave us a lot. Lester Shane is pushing back on your disparagement of interesting. He says, "What's wrong with interesting? Can't that interesting thought or moment be so engaging, so compelling and arresting that it is in and of itself transformative? To be candid," he goes on, "much of what I have heard you say in the sits," and maybe you can define that for people, "have done that."
Lester, I'm grateful for that. The sits you're referring to are the daily sits that we run at 12:30 Eastern that Michal talked about, free and open to the public. Please come anytime you want. And I try to host them on Tuesdays. And Lester's a regular. So thank you. Maybe sure, I'll cop to that, Lester. Maybe I'm being a little, I'll take a little poetic license, but I think in my experience, I certainly often will use the word interesting, and I hear my children use the word interesting as when they don't have anything else to say. Oh, that was interesting. Like, it's just not the most colorful thing to say. It's like, so right. If interesting for you, it works, then fantastic. But I'm really trying to push us into transformative.
I'm throwing in a question of mine. You talked about your body at the beginning and bringing this into our body. And I would love you to kind of riff a little bit more on what it means to physicalize some of this. You write, this is meant to be an opportunity to go beyond the intellectual enterprise and enable the Torah to take root in our bodies. How do you define that for people?
So, and here I would really defer to, if you want to get the best people on this, you should talk to my colleagues. Rabbi Miriam Klotz is, amazing at this. Cantor Lizzie Shamash, who runs our weekly Jewish yoga studio online on Mondays, is also just, amazing at this. But fundamentally, even just for me in my own practice, in a meditation practice, is when I get quiet and I get not just out of my head, I drop in. The language in meditation often is you drop in, right? And I feel myself drop in down here, which is already like getting close to the center of the body, but also then being aware, like what's, going on in the rest of my body, just paying attention to that, right? There's a very common meditation practice of a body scan, like just pay attention to what's going on in your feet and in your calves and in your knees, and just acknowledging that and sitting with it. And so often, I think that we resist we're not aware of, or we resist what's going on in our bodies. And that's to our detriment. We wind up getting hurt, right? Injury, etc. But also, I was talking with someone earlier today, a very successful business person, who was saying, who's a mindfulness practitioner, has been a supporter of IJS. And he said, the most important question to him always is, what is my gut telling me? Right? Like literally, what's happening in my stomach? I listen to my stomach much more than every time I've listened to my head over my stomach, it hasn't worked out. Listen to, like, trust the wisdom of my gut, right? So I think those are just some examples. The truth is, I feel a little awkward, I will say, as a man, a cisgender white middle-aged guy, I'm talking about this, because I think the real leaders in some of this conversation have come from the feminist world, with Abby, which you're very familiar with, as well as in the queer community. I think there's so much that's opening up about embodiment that's really worth paying attention to.
I want to just end a little bit with you very personally, because this, just having watched you through the years, was not necessarily your preordained Jewish path to get to IJS and lead it at this time, and particularly coming through the pandemic and post George Floyd, and we're on the eve of another election. So just in this moment and sort of seeing your personal arc, can you just kind of take us out with a little bit of a reflection as to how IJS maybe has changed you, and how you sort of see the fact that you've landed here now?
Wow. So yeah, for those for those who don't know that much of my story, I'll share a little bit. We have a few minutes. So I did not come through. I didn't come to this through spending time in insight meditation centers, or a Zen center, or going to East Asia. I had really not done much meditation before I came to IJS. I had started a practice just a few months before. And I had come through, I was ordained at a modern Orthodox yeshiva, YCT, Yeshiva Chovevei Torah. I should note that right now on the Amazon Torah list, number 1 and number 2 are me and Rabbi David Kasher, another alumnus of YCT, writing another Torah book. So we're beating out the Art Scroll Chumash right now. But so I didn't come, I came through an intellectual background. I came through a real relationship with the music and performance of the synagogue. Certainly was a big part of me. I was a music major in college. I was going to be an orchestra conductor, which I did for a couple of years in college. And my Jewish practice was very much one of thick and performing mitzvot, because I was commanded to do those. Like, that's how I experienced that, and loving studying Torah, and loving, I love studying Talmud. And then at a certain point, I got introduced to Chassidut, to reading Hasidic literature. I see Rabbi Michael Belinsky's on the call tonight, and Michael was one of the my early influences in learning the Sfat Emet and other Hasidic texts. And I realized they have something important to say here. And throughout my career, I found myself really called towards Torah that I think my bug with interesting has kind of always been there, because I've always been drawn to Torah that I feel like responds to human questions, that it answers human questions. I'm not interested in Torah that's just answering Jewish questions. I want Torah that responds to human questions, to me as a human being and to us as human beings. And so by the time I was at the University of Chicago, I was working there as the Dean of Students at the Divinity School, which is an amazing place to be. And I was at a point in my life and in my career where, like a lot of the rabbis who wind up in coming to our clergy leadership program, I was really sensing that I was ready for something different. I was ready for a next phase in my own Jewish development. and my good friends, Rabbi Sam Feinsmith, who's on our faculty, and Sam was a classmate of mine in Yeshiva, and Rabbi Jordan Ben Dadapel, who is a former faculty member of ours. They had been hawking me for years. Josh, you should come and do the clergy leadership program. And I always said, like, it's not the time, it's not the time. And finally I was like, okay, it's the time. My father had just passed away 6 months before. It was time. And so I had signed up to do the clergy leadership program. And then this job came open, and Aliza Klein, who is the CEO of One Table. And Aliza is one of the people in my life that, you know, if she told me to jump off a high building, like I would just do it because I trust her. She said, you know, you should really look at that job. And one thing led to another, and it turned out to be Bashert. It's been an amazing fit. But the effect of not only the clergy leadership program, but then just being in IJS, for me, it has been, I feel like, an opening, an unfolding, and a becoming into the person and the Jew that I feel like I'm called to be right now. And it has opened up my heart and mind, and just a new, much deeper level of at-homeness in both Torah and Judaism in the world. So thank you for that question.
Well, thank you, Josh. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks to IJS for everything that it gives all of us. I am turning it back to Michal, and thank you all for showing up tonight.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you so much, Josh and Abby, for a great discussion. And Mazal Tov, Josh, on the launch of the book. May it guide us all to ask eternal questions and live into our own authentic responses. Thank you to Molly Easton, to Sherry Edelstein, and Maydell Goodman-Benamy for producing this evening's program. And thank you all for joining us. Please come again. Chodesh Tov. Have a blessed evening.